Hello and welcome to the show. This week's FailRace versus the community was A-Class British cars, and our first race would be at the Yas Marina. Full circuit, I think the first time I've ever used the full layout in a versus the community. 3 cars trying to fit around turn 1, didn't quite work. The bowler got stuck a little bit on the outside, gets slightly tagged by an Esprit, very sideways bowler in the background. This Aston Martin was fighting with a Carlton, and he gets the Carlton while a Caterham just runs that little bit wide, bounces his way across the curbs. Nasty curbs around here, certainly out there, not a fun place to be. 3 cars tried to fit wide through the chicane. Aston Martin taking to the curb, probably a wise idea to try to avoid all of the chaos. He would lose out, getting hung out to dry around the outside of the hairpin. Another Caterham was on the attack. These Caterhams, being so small and light, had an awful lot of acceleration, but the straights here at Yas Marina are really very long, and after sort of about a third of the way down, the Caterhams would start struggling. The Aston Martin can now come flying back past. A Carlton has come from a long way back with an awful lot of straight line speed, gets up the inside as well. Straight line speed at Yas Marina certainly is useful to have. There are certainly a lot of twisty sections as well, but straight line speed down those long straights can be very helpful. This particular Caterham was trying to find a way past an Aston Martin. The Caterham has to get brave on the outside of turn 2. That is not a fun place to be going too wide in. It's a pretty tough manoeuvre to get a car past around that part of the track, so well done to the Caterham. Both of the Aston Martins in that shot there, just running a little bit wide across the very bumpy curves and heavy braking down in towards the chicane. The Caterham can try and build that little bit of a gap necessary, because as soon as they come out of that hairpin, while the Caterham will have the initial acceleration, those Aston Martins will have a much better top-end speed. As we saw, somebody was brave. I wondered if anybody would try and bring a bowler. These, pretty tricky things to get into A-Class, to get right when you're racing against sports cars, such as Sagarises here and Lotuses and so on and so forth. The bowler was very fast in a straight line. I don't know how much power he had in it, assuming quite a lot. This thing was monstrously quick in a straight line as he saw past a TVR Sagaris. They're chasing after a Lotus. At least, of course, the TVR is going to be better on the brakes. TVR tries to make it around the outside, can't quite do it. The bowler gets in all sorts of trouble going up on 2 wheels. That is another perhaps slight problem with the bowler. That's 2-wheel antics across the curb, but again we have the acceleration with that 4-wheel drive traction. I'm assuming it was 4-wheel drive. It certainly gets out of the corners very well, and we have that power, that straight line speed. The bowler's back up the inside of the TVR. They've caught up to a little Lotus Elise as well. That would be a scary sight in a Lotus, having that great big bowler behind you. They sort of all squabble trying to find a way past the Lotus. They can't quite do it. The Aston Martin gets things a little bit wrong, and a big slide from the Aston there. The bowler has lost out a little bit to the TVR and would struggle through the corners. For me, I was driving a Lotus Esprit, had a lot of work to do, having started down the order, lots of cars to try and overtake. We had caught up to the back of the purple Aston Martin and were trying to find a ways past. Esprit was actually a really good car. I really like my Esprit. I wish I had tuned it better, because it was a really good build, just hated the curbs. I needed to do something about its utter hatred for the curbs around here. I look at going around the outside of the Aston Martin. There's another gold Aston Martin trying to follow me through. There's so many cars fitting into a small space. I wasn't quite sure where the Vanquish was going. In the end, he can't quite hold it on the outside. Just simply doesn't have the grip, and all of us would come past. He does fight back though, and gets the gold car on the exit of the hairpin, which is a great opportunistic move. Saw a gap, and he went for it. As I said at the start, straight line speed is not everything around this circuit, because there are lots of twisty sections in this full layout. However, it certainly is quite nice to have it. This little battle was going on further down the pack. Aston Martin Vantage and a Lotus Carlton. You saw how close they were when they came onto the straight. And we'll wait till we go to the bumper camera. Look how far away the Carlton has got. Being able to make up such a huge gap down these long straights was useful for defending. It meant that the straight line speed cars were very hard to overtake, and to keep an overtake past them, because you had one long straight followed by another long straight. Yes, there was a twiddly section after these straights, but you can see the size of the gap the Carlton could get. At the front, and 2 Caterhams were trying to find a way past a TVR Sagaris. And as you just saw with the Carlton there, the Caterhams, very quick around the corners. The Sagaris is not bad around the corners at all, do not get me wrong here. The Sagaris is pretty damn good through the turns. The Caterhams, one of them's managed to find a way past, left a gap, which the TVR was going to take. The other one went very, very wide. But it's a very similar story as we come down this back straight. Caterhams have got the initial acceleration on the Sagaris, but by the time they get sort of a third halfway down, suddenly the TVR will start pulling as the Caterhams just run out of power, and the Sagaris will be back ahead, and they'll be able to make up this margin as they come under braking. Yeah, the Caterhams are going to close back in a little bit down here, but then they've got another very long straight. So provided the TVR doesn't make any mistakes, these cars, these speed cars, if you like, or certainly speed cars in comparison to what they're racing, were going to be very, very hard to overtake, and that is how the latter stages of this race went. Unfortunately, on the final lap, everything went a little bit wrong. The Caterhams were fighting amongst themselves. One went for a dive on the lead, was never quite going to get it stopped, bumped into the side of the Sagaris that pushed the TVR out wide, which meant it would be a Caterham that would take victory. And Aston Martin, I think it was a DBS, came home in second, while the TVR would unfortunately fall to third in that a little unfortunate incident back there. Further back in the bag, this Vanquish was holding on to, I think, about 6th place as we came on the closing corner. He was being caught quite quickly by a Sagaris. TVR got fantastic drive out of the final turn, was closing, but not quite quick enough. The Aston Martin would hold on to the position. TVR couldn't quite do anything about it, although the driver tars would swap positions there. Race number 2 would go to Spa, the first time I've run this circuit versus community as well, on Forza 6. Turn 1 is always a scary prospect. At Spa, anyone who's raced Forza 6 online will know the scary prospect that is Turn 1 at Spa. On the most part, it was relatively okay. There's plenty of runoff area on the outside, so if cars get pushed a little bit wide or they need to avoid incidents, you can on the outside of Turn 1. Unfortunately, it is Eau Rouge where things will go a little bit wrong. Further back in the field, as lots of vehicles will get tangled up through there. The leaders made it through relatively cleanly. I think the two Jaguars at the front got into one another, which allowed this car up into second. It wouldn't be long before he would take the lead. Further back, there was some unusual battles. Vauxhall Astra versus Aston Martin DBR1. This was kind of a bigger group of cars who were all filtering their way through on this opening lap. Aston Martin thought about trying to get to the inside, but these corners around here can be quite tricky ones to overtake. They're very high-speed corners. While there is a little bit of a braking zone, they are still very, very quick corners. So, overtaking manoeuvres through here are a little bit tricky. The Aston Martin got a little too close to the back of the Vauxhall, gave it a slight bump. That caused the Aston Martin no end of trouble. He got hung up to dry on the outside. While I was going past the DB5 further back, the Exige gets up the inside of the DBR1. The Exige then tries to go around the outside of 2 cars. It's a big slide, manages to avoid the chaos that's going on further up, and another little bump between the Lotus and the Aston, and everybody's getting mugged from every which way. It's all a little bit chaotic here at Spa. The Exige gets dumped down a couple of positions. All the meanwhile, the Astra is escaping away at the front of this group. I get deposited on the outside and into the gravel. The DBR1 and the Astra probably survived the best out of all of that. Suitably chaotic first lap. Certainly I had kind of fears of running Spa reverse community. I tend not to. It tends to become a little too crazy as we run down towards Eau Rouge. The Aston Martin on the inside did not fancy trying to fit so many cars into one space. I made the most of it, then got very close to an incredibly twitchy DBR1, deciding to go out wide. It was probably the best course of action there to try to avoid a huge accident. Esprit had pretty good straight line speed. This thing as I round up a course, and I'm on the outside of an Astra as well, down this back straight, and I would be able to get ahead of the Astra, better under brakes than the Vauxhall, and get the position. As I said before, I really liked my Esprit, but you couldn't run across curbs in this car, or puddles, as you'll see later on. Slightly let down by my lack of tuning skill, really, that vehicle. Further back up towards the front, the Astra and the Aston Martin were to resume their little battle after some lap 1 craziness. These guys would go back to fighting. Is again a very, very tough corner to overtake around here. You're better off setting up a manoeuvre coming down towards these final very tight corners. The Astra is well aware of this, goes defensive on the inside. Aston Martin is going for the Brave around the outside, can't stop it quite in time as they come back together for the next corner. Aston Martin just gets it wrong, it's just carrying too much speed through that corner, bumps the side of the Astra ever so slightly, but the Vauxhall comes off a hell of a lot better than the DBR1 that went outside a little bit exploring. I found myself battling with Bentley, with the almighty wing up ahead. For parts of this, it was literally my windscreen was just filled with wing. That's Bentley was huge when you're driving. The Love and the Esprit isn't the smallest of the Lotuses either. But yeah, the Bentley very, very quick in a straight line, but the Lotus far better through the corners. Much as I said at Yas Marina, I was finding it quite difficult here as well to get an overtaking manoeuvre to stick. This was my best opportunity. Get a good run out of the corner. I saw the Bentley was struggling a little bit for traction, but I'm stuck on the outside. I give it a go anyway. There is just enough space for a Lotus Esprit to fit, and sure enough, I get it around the outside, but I'm still stuck on the outside for this next corner, which is, again, not a particularly fun place to find yourself, especially with a car that doesn't like curbs. I'm still running across the curbs, managed to get the Lotus across in front of the Bentley, and the move was finally done. I was pretty pleased with that particular overtaking manoeuvre. Unfortunately, I'll crash off after hitting a curb later on, but never mind. This was what was going on towards the front of the field. The leader managed to vanish off a little bit up ahead of these guys. This lot remained close, but not a huge amount happened for large parts of this race. They kind of could all see each other, were all relatively close, but nobody was within overtaking range. This Jag runs a little wide, very, very close to the tyre bundles. Not a place you particularly want to be out there. But at the front, it was a Jaguar XKRS that was to go on to take victory. Can't say I was particularly expecting to see one of these necessarily be the vehicles to take victory, but he would get as you saw, you can see the cars further back, a relatively comfortable victory. I believe it was Aston Martin's in second and third for the finish of this one. Yeah, the Jags and Aston Martin actually got, I think, from first to eighth were Jags and Aston Martins at Spa. They did very, very well around there. Our third and final race would go for a typical English day at Brands Hatch. Unfortunately, turn one was not as clean this time around, as a couple of cars managed to get into trouble early on. There was a little bit of a laggy lobby going on. I think there was one car that I couldn't see in the lobby, and I'm fairly sure there were a few vehicles that other people couldn't, just weren't appearing on their screen. It wasn't the best of days, I will be honest, for Forza servers this one. They were having the fair share of problems. The Jaguar gets turned around coming down the hill. This Metro was all sorts of crossed up as well as an Elise sliding about. Metro trying to get around the outside of an Astra does not quite going to work, doesn't quite have the drive down towards the next corner. Metro, brave choice of car. These things are twitchy as hell, incredibly difficult to get a tune working on them. So yeah, I applaud it with bravery trying to make one of them work. Another car that I really didn't expect to see in this race, a Lotus 11. Normally in A-Class, these things are so light and so powerful, they're nigh on undrivable. This one was pretty damn good, actually. Got himself up the inside of an Elise. The Elise promptly overcooks it big time. It's a very, very big slide from the Elise around that final corner. Yeah, I would not have particularly gone for a Lotus 11, especially in the rain. I've had plenty of problems with incredibly light cars and wet weather races, but this one was seeming to work pretty well, ranging up onto the back of a Vauxhall and Aston Martin that was leading this little group. The Elise, after having a very big sideways moment, was now back all under control and catching up. The 11 gives the Vauxhall a little bit of a nudge, perhaps trying to get to the inside down here. Can't quite make it stick. Doesn't really matter though, as the Vauxhall just runs out of grip on the outside. Just tries to get the power down a little too soon. Slides the car out of the corner, and both of the Lotuses would come flying past. These guys a little further back were squabbling as well. Lotus Exige trying to get himself alongside a Caterham, does successfully, as the Caterham has all manner of problems going through the puddles. The puddles around here were very, very dangerous for some of the cars, quite easy to hit them and have a big slidey moment, as we saw from the Caterham. Lotus gets the cutback working on the little Caterham, but that R500 has so much acceleration out of the corners. Even though the Exige could get himself in the position he wanted to, he just couldn't match the acceleration of that Caterham, so the Caterham would fend off the position. I was in third. I briefly took the lead, promptly fell off the road, dropped back to third. I was having real problems with my Esprit around here. Again, combination of it not really liking curbs, but the bigger issue was I hit a puddle and it just threw the car sideways. It was really not very good to drive around here. A quick car, I was setting competitive lap times. I was as quick as anybody around here, but you see how much I'm fighting the car, especially when we go across a puddle. Got to be super, super careful with this Esprit. Very, very easy to make mistakes, which means that I was being hounded over third place by an Astra. So yeah, my poor Lotus. It wasn't the greatest of evenings, if you like, for the Esprit. I was fending off the Astra for now, but it was only a matter of time before I managed to hit a curb and spin the poor Esprit around. At the front, and it was an unusual battle with me well and truly out of the question. It fell to a Land Rover Defender and Lotus Exige, not two vehicles that you normally see racing one another. Thing was, the Defender was actually really rather quick. With four-wheel drive and decent power, it meant that getting out of the corners had so much acceleration that the Lotus was having a really tough time trying to find a way past. It just couldn't quite get himself into a position to make an overtaking manoeuvre because the Land Rover would get so far away out of a corner, that four-wheel drive working very, very well for the Defender. It could get so far away out of these turns that whenever it came to a braking zone, the Exige could just do nothing about it. The Land Rover is also a fairly sizable car. Could do a decent job of defending and blocking the way. So yeah, for a few laps, the Exige just couldn't find a way past. However, it was kind of inevitable eventually the Land Rover would crack. And as we run up towards this next corner, Land Rover just pushed his luck a little too much, braked a little too late, put him out wide. I mean, it's all very well having a vehicle that's great at defending, but you can't afford to make a mistake, and just a tiny, tiny mistake from the Defender was going to cost him. He tried to keep it side by side with the Exige, but the grip in the Land Rover was no match for the Lotus, and while, yes, he had the acceleration, he was now a little too far back. He couldn't hold up the Lotus through the corners, and the Exige would scamper away at the front. Unfortunately, this race here also wasn't the greatest of events. Very quickly became quite spread out. I think this is about fourth place's car. It might have been third place. Just nobody around. There's just absolutely nobody in sight around this car. Yeah, a little bit spread out. We also, as I said, had some lobby troubles. You'll have seen quite a few lagged out ghost cars just littering the track. A little bit unfortunate. That's just how online racing can go sometimes. Yeah, it wasn't the greatest of races. At the front, though, it was the Lotus that would go on to take victory. You can see the Defender sliding his way through the corner there in the background. Yeah, the Defender could hold up the Exige for a while, but once the Lotus was past, nothing he could really do. I was a little disappointed that I couldn't fight with these guys with the Esprit. I could set the lap times, I just couldn't be consistent. The car was so difficult to drive in these wet conditions. But yeah, there you go. That's a little disappointment at Brands Hatch. Not quite the greatest of races. Yas Marina though and Spa weren't too bad. There were a few incidents in them particular ones. Anyway, that is it for this week's Versus the Community. The next one shall be held on Thursday, the 17th of December. We are going to be racing with B-Class Superlights, so cars that weigh £2,000 or less. If you want to sign up and take part in this event, then you can go to our forums. There will be a link in the description. Find the FailRace Versus the Community section, and you will be able to sign up in there. But that is it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.